Hello and welcome to the Cinco de Mayo version of BS and Beer tonight. The BS and Beer Show, Building Science, is a grassroots movement. We share building science knowledge through our local meetup groups and this, our Zoom show. The brew crew and our guests volunteer their time each month to come and bring you an informative discussion. Tonight's topic is business leadership transitions. I am Emily Mottram. I'm here in Maine. And I am drinking a Storm Surge from a local brewery here. So I do like a good IPA. If you're interested in starting your own BS and Beer group, we encourage it. Find advice on how to start your own group on our website, thebsandbeershow.com, or ask a member of our brew crew. And tonight we want to thank our media partners, Green Building Advisor and Fine Home Building, for helping us make this happen every month. So Ben, off to you for general announcements.
All right, I'm Ben Bogey. I'm in Connecticut, and this evening I'm drinking a lovely field beer from Kent Falls Brewing. So find the chat box icon at the bottom of your screen. You can post questions and comments there. Be sure to click on the all panelists and attendees button or everyone. Otherwise, Zoom tends to revert to panelists only, which means only we can see your comments. Fine Home Building sends out Zoom reminders each week. If you want to receive those as well as other information, join our mailing list at thebsandbeershow.com or check out the weekly post at Green Building Advisor that goes up on Sunday mornings. The video recordings of tonight's show will be available at Green Building Advisor, and all past shows can be found on YouTube and through a link at thebsandbeershow.com. An audio-only version of the BS and Beer Show is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And we have quite a few mentions this week. We have Travis's well-organized, lovely Sweet 16 wall assembly contest. Wall Assembly Sweet 16 is an international student wall assembly competition held annually by BS and Beer of Kansas City and the School of Apprenticeship and Skilled Trades at George Brown College. Participants will design a wall assembly for their climate zone while considering 6 criteria with a focus on applied building science. The competition is open to any high school, college, or university students in North America. There's no fee to enter. The winner receives a $1,000 prize, and runners-up will make out pretty well too. So if you know any trade schools or programs in your area that you can promote this to, we'd love to have them involved. There's quite a bit of sponsorship going out to these programs from this. BS and Beer in Roanoke, Virginia had a good session this week. They're second. If you're in the Roanoke area, check out the Instagram for BS and Beer Roanoke VA. Mike will post these links in the chat box and see what they're talking about next. BS and Beer Kansas City is live on May 10th discussing making passive possible on site at a SIPS-based project poised to reach the rigorous Passive House standard. BS and Beer ATX in Austin, Texas will have their first meeting coming up later in May. BS and Beer with SIGA for Trivia Night is coming up in New Hampshire on May 19th and also will be broadcast across the interweb. So join us for some fun building science trivia. And the Pretty Good House book is done and it will be available starting in June. So we're all anxiously awaiting for that to show up in our mailboxes. Congrats to Emily and Mike for that heroic effort.
Wow.
And now on to Travis.
Travis Brungard. I'm in Prairie Village, Kansas. I'm going to be drinking a Schnickel Fritz tonight, which is one of my favorites from Urban Chestnut. And I'm drinking it from an NBA Cat Watch koozie. And there are 3 or 4 people in the world that know what that is, so I won't waste any time on that. But I will say that I love that the Pretty Good House book is going to maybe sneak out ahead of Allison's book that was started first. This is the race to the finish. And I'm so excited to have pre-ordered both. The first one in the mailbox is going to be the winner. I'm so excited. I'm excited to also introduce our guests. John Abrams is CEO and co-founder of the South Mountain Company on Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts, a company he spent 45 years developing and growing. He is the author of the book, Companies We Keep, Employee Ownership and the Business of Community in Place, which covers topics we'll be talking about tonight. John, nice to see you again. Thanks for joining us. Are you drinking tonight?
It's great to see you too. Yeah, I'm kind of off. I'm not on the beer thing, but I do have a little shot of Basil Hayden.
Nice.
Ooh,
very classy. Way to class up the joint. Well, thank you again for joining us. We also have Deirdre Bohan.
Nice to be here.
We also have Deirdre Bohan, who is the COO and co-owner of South Mountain Company. Since joining the team in 1995, she has served in a variety of roles, including bookkeeper, founder of the Interiors Department, chair of the Management Committee, and now COO. Thanks for coming back. It's good to see you again. Are you enjoying a beer with us tonight?
I am not. I'm having a San Pellegrino.
Well, that's a lovely choice. I
Thanks for having us.
We're thrilled to have you both back. And I guess I didn't really give you a chance to say anything more about yourselves. This is a short intro. If I skipped over something important, John, please chime in. And of course, please do that now, Deirdre.
Now you got it all.
You're good. Thanks.
Fantastic. We're also fortunate to have Rachel White, CEO of Big Meister Design Build, a nearly 40-year-old residential remodeling company in Massachusetts. Rachel has been affiliated with Big Meister since 2008, when she hired the firm to renovate her own home. She says what started as an effort to reduce the energy and carbon footprint of her own home became her life's work. That's a beautiful sentence. Thank you for joining us, Rachel.
Well, thank you for having me. I am not drinking beer either, but I am having a Provence style Slovenian rosé. One of the first warm days around here calls for rosé.
Beautiful. I love how classy this panel is. Let's see if we can keep it going. Fingers crossed, Paul. Paul Eldrenkamp is a business consultant with Home Construction Solutions in Vermont. He is also the founder of Big Meister. Most recently, he helped establish the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association's BEST program, the BEST program, which creates mentoring and career discovery opportunities between small design, construction, and engineering businesses and students from Boston area vocational high schools, which is something that I'm certainly passionate about. Thank you for doing that, Paul. And thank you for joining us. What's going on, man?
It's great to be here, and I have Lord Hobo 617, named after my favorite area code.
So many to choose from, but only one can be your favorite. That's a beautiful thing. Well, thank you all for joining us. With that, I'll certainly pass it on to our good friend and fearless leader, Mike.
Thank you, Travis. I am Mike Maines in Maine. Tonight I am drinking a local craft brewed polar seltzer. I don't have a whole lot to say. I am going to turn it over to our distinguished guests. Have a nicely organized agenda all planned out, and they'll each speak for a few minutes. So I'm just going to turn it over to you guys to do what you want to do.
So it might seem nicely planned, but I don't know what the order is that we're going in. Does anybody?
Oh, okay.
I'm last. I know that. I thought it was Paul, Rachel, then you, then me.
Okay,
That's fine.
go Paul.
Okay.
All right.
Or-
I'm sorry,
or-
Mike. Should I just launch right in?
Or well, should I ask maybe I can ask the questions here. That's what we ought to do. I'll ask the questions on the sheet and you guys can respond. That probably makes sense.
Actually, I think each of us we prepared a little introduction. So why don't we start there just to
Oh.
give some background on our leadership transitions, and then we go into the questions. How does that sound?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we
All
need to-
right.
Go Paul.
So I have 3 points I want to cover in my little introduction. First is, why are we here in a building science group talking about leadership transitions? The second is, what are the nuts and bolts of a leadership transition, at least from where I sit? And then the third is, how do you improve your chances of a successful transition? And the first, why should a building science group care about leadership transitions? It's because leadership transitions are about creating good businesses, and you can't do good building science without a good business backing you up. Good businesses have the resources to do good building science because they have the resources to evaluate whether their work is holding up properly. The scientific method consists of setting a hypothesis, testing the hypothesis by running experiments and observing the results, and then changing the hypothesis. Generally speaking, what happens in the world of construction is we set the hypothesis, which is this collection of design details, products, and assembly techniques will be efficient and durable over time. So we start the experiment, but then we never go back to observe it because we just don't have the time, money, or resources to go back and really observe it. It's really important to have businesses that do have those resources because otherwise we're what we're practicing is more of a religion than a science. It's entirely faith-based building. And also I want to just add to that building science is not an end in itself. And I would venture to say that most of what that most days building is not the most important thing most of us are doing. There is a bigger picture. I would say that the most important thing most of us are doing on a daily basis is empowering people by giving them better options than they had before they met us. And I think that's what the essence of leadership transition is, making sure all the people who are our stakeholders in our businesses have better options as a result. Second, what are the nuts and bolts of a leadership transition, at least from where I sit? I think I have 5 factors that, at least to me, were very useful and possibly even essential. One was creating a process map, a document that clarified and defined how we are able to deliver a consistent, replicable, and predictably high quality service and product. We can talk about that more during Q&A if we want. Second is having a good management team in place, getting more eyes on the inner workings of the business. Big Meister's management team has 4 people. It's important to have more eyes, not only on the inner workings of the business, but more eyes on the CEO or owner's decision-making process. Shine a light on those decisions because some of them may be the result more of entrenched bad habits than of good business instincts. The third is dashboard reports for those for that management team to review periodically, identify some critical indicators and track them. Critical indicators that can be quantified, track them, and talk about which way they're trending and why and what to do about it. Give your management team some time each month to step back and think about what you're doing. Fourth is a sabbatical. I learned this from John. It was as I told him, it was the most inspirational word in his book. Let's say current reality is here and ownership transition or leadership transition feels like it's 1,000 miles away. A 3-month sabbatical might feel to the team like, well, that's only 200 miles away. That's a stretch, but we can do it. So you prepare for the sabbatical, you take the sabbatical, you come back, and somehow miraculously that leadership and ownership transition is not 800 miles away, but now it's 200 miles away. That 200 miles you were hoping to gain from the sabbatical, in fact, was 800 miles, and that transition feels a lot more attainable. And then the last factor is sheer dumb luck. And I have to acknowledge that. I'm on this panel tonight because I appear to know what I'm doing. But if Rachel White had not called me in 2008 and asked about a renovation on her home, I may not have been invited to be on this panel tonight. And I have to acknowledge that, the importance of that luck. So that brings me to my third point, which is how can I improve the chances of a successful transition? How can I increase the odds that good luck will come my way? And I think there's 2 strategies there. One is to hire people who excite you, hold out, in fact, for people who excite you. And then the other is to create a culture of team-supported individual accountability. I think the individual accountability is really important in any organization. And I think the team support is essential for those individuals to be able to be as accountable as they aspire to. And I will leave it there, and I've forgotten whom I'm handing it off to.
Rachel.
I think to me, I think it makes sense for me to follow you. Thanks, that was great, Paul. So I think what I'm going to say will dovetail nicely with Paul, though I'm going to go in a slightly different direction, and I'm going to share share the story of my stepping into leadership as in the context also of Big Meister's ownership transition. Um, and we'll go from there. So big picture, Big Meister became a worker-owned business last fall, 2021. I stepped up as CEO in 2018, and Paul let us know in 2014, the entire company, that he was planning to retire. So that's sort of the timeline that we're on. As Travis, I put in my bio and Travis announced at the beginning, my path, my introduction to the company started as a client in 2008. I was at a crossroads in my life at that point. I had finished my PhD, ironically enough, in Paul's reference to faith-based building and religious studies. And Paul used to say, until I told him to stop, that I was the conscience of the company. But in any event, I was teaching part-time. I knew I wanted out of academia, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. I had become increasingly concerned about climate change and wanted to do what I could to reduce my carbon footprint. My husband and I hired Big Meister to do a renovation and retrofit, and the rest was history. Now, by the end of the project, I had signed on as a consultant to help Big Meister quantify and track sustainability goals. And then, as I said earlier, so I had been with the company for 6 years, 4 as a consultant, and then 2 as an employee when Paul announced to the entire company that he intended to retire in 2024. And so he'd given us 10 years. There was a moment soon after this when I learned that Paul thought I had leadership potential. We were at a Bottom Lines business network gathering. Paul and John and also Jamie Wolf are founders of Nessie's Building Energy Bottom Lines program, which is peer business network. In any event, Paul and I were at one of those gatherings talking about the future of Big Meister, and another business owner asked Paul who he thought might lead the company after him. And what I heard Paul say was, well, I think Rachel could lead. He remembers it differently. We've talked about this many times. He remembers saying, well, I think Rachel could lead as part of a team, et cetera, whether I stopped listening or Paul had stopped talking, I'm not sure what the answer is, but all I heard was, well, I think Rachel could lead. And that was the first time he and I had ever talked about this. And announcing it at a Bottom Lines gathering is not exactly talking about it. So at that time, I was Big Meister's performance manager, developing our energy tracking program to quantify the impact of our work on home energy use and carbon emissions. That was great work. I really loved that work. It was intellectually stimulating, and it's become a really core part of how we define success, but I would hardly call it an essential business responsibility. So I am still not sure, thinking back, what made Paul think that I have leadership potential, but I've always been a sucker for challenges, and so didn't take much convincing for me to jump in. At that point in 2014, Paul still had several core business functions when he announced that his intention was to retire in 10 years, which felt like a long time at the time, but it took us 7 years to get there. So I guess we beat the schedule by 3 years, but still it was, there was a lot to do. He was the rainmaker, the sole person responsible for sales and project development. He oversaw finance and operations virtually on his own. Over the course of the next 4 years, between then and when I stepped up as CEO, we diversified those functions. So over time, I became the primary rainmaker. We now have 2 people who are responsible for sales and project development, and that may diversify further. And of course, as Paul mentioned, we developed a management team to oversee finance and operations. And I would just say, and echoing what Paul said, that I think this last piece has been really crucial to the success both of our leadership transition and our subsequent ownership transition in 2021. I could not lead this company, nor would I want to, without a strong management team, which I feel that this broad 4-person team has made us more resilient, more profitable, and just overall better building science, better at serving our clients, at attracting and retaining talent, just better overall. We started discussing converting to worker ownership in 2016, and I hadn't yet stepped up as CEO at that point, but I was on the path. In those early discussions, I would say I was attracted to the model primarily for moral and philosophical reasons. And I also saw its benefit to individual workers in terms of having the opportunity to own a share of a profitable business and to build wealth. What I didn't realize, but have since subsequently learned as we've gone through this process, was just how much shared ownership could benefit the business. The opportunity to share in the profits of the business and have a say in the company's future has, I think, really deepened employees' commitment to the company. And employees were very dedicated to the company before we embarked on the path to worker ownership. But I would say that that's only been strengthened. It's also been really galvanizing for our management team. I think we all feel an extraordinary sense of responsibility to our fellow owners to wisely steward the ship. And I think it's given us a great deal of faith in the company's staying power, including our ability to develop future leaders. So that's a whirlwind tour through our transition. I would just, I guess, conclude by saying, you know, there were definitely times, particularly early on, when I worried a lot about how I could ever fill Paul's shoes. And people used to say things to me like, oh, those are big shoes to fill. And so, of course, that made me worry more. Things I would say got a little bit easier, although they never got easy. Once I realized that filling Paul's shoes was not really the task at hand, and that the way to ensure that Big Meister survives and thrives is to continuously build capacity and to empower others to step into their potential. Our future success is really not dependent on filling Paul's shoes. It's dependent on each of us filling our own and making it possible for those who come after us to fill theirs. John?
Nice.
Well
Nice,
said.
Rachel. So just a little context here. I think it's relevant. Today, a silver tsunami is underway. Several million baby boomer are transitioning as founders, baby boomer businesses are, as founders and owners retire. The two businesses represented here are emblematic of that wave. We are not isolated in any way. This is a major thing that is happening in the small business world. And there's a difference between ownership and leadership transitions. So Paul and Rachel have talked about the ownership and leadership transition that took place at Big Meister. Mostly in small business, they happen concurrently like that and are often equated and bundled. In our case, the ownership transition happened 35 years ago when our sole proprietorship became a worker co-op, which is too long a story to tell in this intro, but a good one for another time or later in the session, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, our leadership transition is in process and will conclude at the end of this year. There's some part of an ownership transition as well, because on January 1, 2022, I will no longer be an owner and I will no longer be employed by South Mountain. But it's different than the ownership transitions most companies go through, because there's a prescribed process for terminating ownership. And my ownership transition will be no different from 20 others who have relinquished ownership over the past 30 years at South Mountain. And that's an important thing to remember, the idea of transitioning ownership early and leadership later. So for the next 2 years, I'm going to continue on to serve on the board of directors and work 8 hours a week as a consultant. And our leadership transition began, like Big Meister's, in 2014. They're done, we're not. That's like one of the differences between the two companies. But anyway, that started when we completed our first draft avalanche scenario. So what happens tomorrow if I'm buried by an avalanche today, and our next 40 plan? At that time in 2014, we didn't know anything about how we'd come to a next CEO. Would we hire from outside, co-CEOs from within, someone emerges from within? She did. And since then, we've become a dramatically different company, but it's taken all of these 8 years to create and implement and manage this transition. I founded this company when I was 23. In September, I'll be 73. So what does it feel like to leave this center of my gravity for 50 years? You know, our shop manager, Jim, who's been filling that role for 33 years, is also retiring, actually before me. And I asked him, it just happened today that I asked him if he ever says to himself, whoa, am I really doing this? And he looked at me and he said, yeah. I mean, it was kind of deer in the headlights. He goes, yeah, I do every day. I told him that it only happens to me sometimes in the middle of the night, but when I wake up in the morning, the timing once again feels just right. So the answer to that question about leaving the center of my gravity after 50 years has two parts: how it feels to me now as we proceed through this transition, and how it will feel when it's complete. And after that, I'll tell how it feels now and how I think it will feel, but I obviously can't tell how it really will. So I can barely express how thrilling it is to be part of this journey to the next generation, due to an incredibly strong and committed community of owners and employees, and a talented and well-aligned leadership team, and Deirdre, who has just stepped up in extraordinary ways. South Mountain is right now by far the best company that it's ever been. And as I inch closer to retirement, I can tell unequivocally that it will only get better between now and then, and for a very long time after I've begun to explore the next stage of my life. And I'm grateful that the new team will begin its tenure in a position of great strength. We've learned a ton from each other during this shared adventure. We've learned the degree to which nobody's smarter than everybody, and how to build divergences into greater successes. And that despite how little we know when we enter new territory, we know, we have this confidence that we will find our way. Like they say, even a blind squirrel finds an occasional nut. But perhaps the thing that we've learned of utmost importance is how to talk to each other frankly and honestly, openly, respectfully, about virtually anything. A friend of mine says, the health of an organization is inversely proportional to the number of undiscussables. I'm going to say that again, all right? So he says, the health of an organization is inversely proportional to the number of undiscussables. I think we have few at this point. I think some years ago, we may have had many, but no more. And that is important to the success of this transition. So after years of work, with 7 months left, we're virtually done. And at this point, I say that we're just polishing the mirror. That's all we have left to do. And next year's looking pretty stellar to me. 8 hours a week with people I love, 30 hours a week to fill with my own stuff. That notion just fills me with great pleasure, and I hope it will endure. Deirdre?
Great, thanks. So I'm Deirdre Bohan, and as Travis mentioned, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at South Mountain, and I'll become the CEO in January. It's been more than 25 years since I first answered an ad in the Vineyard Gazette as a bookkeeper. And as I started as a bookkeeper, then I started our interior design department, then I became the COO, and now I'm heading into my 4th career at South Mountain, now that time. So as John mentioned, our transition process crystallized in 2018 when we did a deep dive into the different models we thought about. We knew from the start we would have an internal transition, but we wouldn't be hiring from the outside. So we wanted to talk with friends at companies that we respected to see how they handled it. We talked to King Arthur Flour. They had I think it was a 4-person CEO team that then dropped down to a 3-person CEO team. Alex Moss at Praxis Consulting, they're a small consulting, ESOP consulting company in Philadelphia, and they had an internal transition. And then the last one was Cindy Turcott at Gardner Supply in Vermont, who also had an internal transition. So after we'd done that research, we kind of came back to our management team and we said, what do we do now? And we determined that we were probably going to go with a co-CEO plan. I had expressed really clearly that the CEO role wasn't what I wanted personally. I'm introverted. My strength is strategic and operational, and I always prefer the kind of backseat, get things done role, a little bit of invisibility, not way out front. So, so a co-CEO plan sounded kind of good. I could keep doing my things and somebody else could do the John things out front and in person. So the question became, if we were going to do it that way, who was the other CEO, one or two other people, and how were we going to pick them? So it was 2018 at Christmas time. John and I were going on separate vacations. We said we would return with a plan. And I spent 2 weeks, it was a long vacation, trying to think about a plan, and I came back with nothing. I was like more confused when I came back. So John and I sat on the opposite side of the table in his office, and I said, I got nothing. He's like, I got something. I got an idea. I'm like, go ahead. I'm all ears. And his idea was our reality now, that we migrate our management committee to a leadership team made up of me, John, and our 4 department directors. We did it this way, really, because we couldn't figure out which of those department directors we'd leave out. It just didn't seem like any combo would leave out a key person in our team, and we didn't know how to make that work. So I lead this amazing team right now, and it's been a wild, challenging, stimulating, and fun experience over the last couple of years trying to make this happen for us. Before I go into the details, I wanted to digress a little and talk about kind of what Rachel touched on in the changing nature of leadership in organizations. We're finding our strength in making this change over the last couple of years in 2 contexts, under John's very generous brand of leadership, and also in the context of changing ideas about what leadership is, who gets to be a leader, what does it mean to be a leader, how does leadership happen? I'm going to lead what is traditionally and in our area known as a construction company, and that's pretty unusual. The trades are a huge economic driver on Martha's Vineyard, so it's a key consideration. And as we know, the perception of what good leadership means is kind of now from moving from having power over somebody or over an organization or giving power to the organization, to collaboration, to authenticity, to transparency. And these have always been a core part of our culture and core part of our employee ownership. And they underpin this leadership transition too. So over the last couple of years, we've been strengthening our technical, cultural, and emotional capacities. Long ago, as with Big Noister, we made a list of roles and tasks that John filled, and we're whittling away at that list. We're passing along big things like estimating, sales, financial oversight. At the same time, each member of the leadership team's been strengthening their skills. They're really leaning into their department management. Our departments are architecture and engineering, production, energy technology, and finance administration, and collaborating as a leadership team. We're working on identifying key parts of our culture and codified a lot of them into something we call the Path to Ownership, which is a 5-year program for new employees. We're thinking hard about recruiting and our future leaders. And personally, I've worked a lot on communication skills, in particular, how to communicate change in the organization, what it means for me to step out and own this role, and getting comfortable with things like giving this talk. Just as we got into this work, the pandemic hit. And that just kind of threw us all into disarray. But in some ways, it was an awesome leadership opportunity in disguise. We had everything, that all the challenges were right there. I had always been afraid of a recession. I never even imagined a pandemic. We were all so glad that we had this strong team, that John was still on board. We had financial challenges, health challenges, cultural challenges, mandated work stoppage on Martha's Vineyard, remote work, and I was our COVID safety officer, so it was a distinctive leadership learning experience for me. In the last several months, as John mentioned, we've just seen so much progress and so many things that we've been working on for like 2 years really bear fruit. I mean, seriously, between March and April, we are just feeling like we are on the other side of all this preparation. April can sometimes have an awkward energy at South Mountain. It's when we do our performance reviews, and it's just kind of a challenging energy. It's unsettled feeling. But this April was extraordinary. We found ourselves in a place where we had no serious performance issues to address, only skill development opportunities. And that was just incredible. John and I attended every meeting. We heard things like, aligned, happy to be here, respectful, engaged. And this is almost the most meaningful to us. Best field shop and solar crew we've ever had. And that's over a really long period of time. So we're layering on top of that some strategic planning that we've been doing in the last couple months since January. Yesterday, we had a half-day all hands offsite, which we had been doing once a year, but now I think we'll do twice a year. And that was strategic planning. We talked about our guiding principles, our mission, and our strategic plan. And it was kind of the culmination of all this work that we've been doing together. So this new strategic plan, which will probably finish at the end of June, will kick off and usher the new era. One where every staff feels like they've contributed to crafting their collective future. And it was a pretty amazing meeting. It was the first meeting like this that we've had where I felt like everyone came to the meeting knowing that the work that they were going to do together was just as important as their other roles and responsibilities. And they radiated that energy to us as presenters. It was remarkable. So it's a pretty exciting moment for us. We feel like we're on the cusp of reaching the place we want to be. We've trained up in our capacities. We have the tools in place we want to be using. We have an ideal team, a strong work pipeline lined up, great clients, and great alignment. So
I want to add one thing. Yeah, that's so right on the mark. Yesterday was amazing. It was the last time that I would be at one of these day of businesses in a leadership role. In November, I will be at the day of business sitting in one of those soft, cushy seats that everybody else gets to sit in. But I want to add something. After that, after Deirdre and I sat and talked about how we could move forward with this plan, it was clear that she was the person to be the CEO. And we went to a leadership team meeting, and I put that out there that obviously we're not going to have 5 co-CEOs. And it feels like Deirdre should be the first among equals CEO of this company. And I expected some pushback because that meant that some people that were in that room were not going to be that or not going to be co-CEOs. The idea of co-CEOs was gone or would be gone. There was none. There was just tremendous support. Oh my God, of course, that is what we should do. And it really just speaks to the tremendous respect and admiration that she has earned from all of these people. So that got us to where we are today.
thank you.
As somebody who's currently sitting in a position where we're in the very early stages of a leadership transition and move to a worker-owned cooperative, hearing this from you guys is reassuring that we're on the right path. I think one of the things that you realize when you start to take on these tasks is that it is a long road ahead to do this successfully and equitably and with everybody having a stake at the table. But I just want to kind of touch a little bit more on something that Paul brought up in the beginning is, why is the building science group getting together to discuss this? And something that I got out of Nessie a number of years ago is that we're all very good at building buildings, but are we good at building businesses? And that's a tough question to wrestle with, because if we're trying to do this work that's espousing to raise the industry and possibly do good for the environment, then we should really be paying just as much attention to building good businesses so that we can continue to do this work for more than the lifetime of one set of owners. So that was my soapbox for the moment.
Yeah, and I talked about us doing guiding principles yesterday, and we have a lot of guiding principles. You can find them on our website, but we added one that was about successive leadership transitions. That we should always be thinking about that. This is only the first of many that we hope to have.
Yeah, it's very. We have found that with we've actually noticed that we have been hiring recently because many have retired. The old guard is gone, and these new passionate young people, they are third generation leadership. And we will never have a situation like now when a founder has been there for almost half a century. Deirdre will be 56 years old, I think, when she's CEO. So how long is she going to be there? 15 years? So we're going to be doing another one of these transitions. They are really soon. Then shut up. So that's a big thing, the third generation leadership.
It forces you to think about these things and think about how you're going to formalize the structure of whatever the business is so that it can have those principles of longevity, because we're in the same boat. Like I said, we're very early in this process, but thinking about how can we do our diligence right now to codify what this business means and how we want to see it managed in order for it to carry on, beyond the current transition, just like you guys are saying. And hopefully, I would like to retire someday, and I'd like to know that this business carries on. So how do we think about that, and how do we build that now? And it's interesting to see the growth in this conversation. A handful of years ago, very few people were talking about this in our industry, and now, like John, you said, it's a silver tsunami. We're seeing this pop up all over the place in, companies that we align with.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, I know you both have sort of mid-size to larger firms, but could you just sort of explain how many people you have or some other metric of size? And then what do you think, as sort of broad lessons, what might change for different size companies, or do you think size is irrelevant?
That's a really good question. Bigmeister has 14 employees, including Paul, who will no longer be an employee at May 31st. He's very excited. May 31st at 12 noon, right? Something like that.
Yep.
That's what he's always said. And 4.5 million in revenue this year. So I think, one of the things that's different, South Mountain is bigger and had considerably more structure in place going into this than we did. Had a management committee. It sounds like in your mind, there's a difference between what the management committee was, the identity of that, and what the leadership team has become, what you changed that into, but you had that structure in place that Bigmeister did not. And so that was really key, and I think that I think it's always, I don't know at what size, if you get down small enough, what point, how big you need to be to have the benefit of multiple sets of eyes. But I do think it's been really critical for us to have the multiple sets of eyes, monitoring performance, and driving business improvements. So I don't think I'm really answering your question. I don't know, Deirdre, what would you say? There is
I would
different
say
for different size.
In round numbers, we have 35 employees and about $18 million in revenue. And I would go back to what Paul said about the sabbatical as being the key part. We didn't have any of that management structure until John went on sabbatical, and he went on 2 successive sabbaticals, and they were 4 or 5 months long. He was in Vermont. He wasn't very far away, but it was before Zoom, well before Zoom, so that we didn't have this opportunity that we would have like this evening. And that's when it emerged that we needed a management committee and that we needed people in these roles that were going to take this responsibility. And I think, so it's what Paul said. That's like one of the first things to do. And then you're going to see where you need to do a lot of the work, right?
How long ago was that, Deirdre?
I don't know.
2005.
2005. Long time ago. Yeah.
And 6.
Yeah.
It's a real burden to take 3 months off, but somebody has to do it.
So one of the things I would say is that size really doesn't matter, except it's so important to give respect to internal processes, as much respect to internal processes as to the product that you make. I think Paul alluded to this. And with some size, you have more latitude and more financial ability to do that. But these processes can happen over a very long period of time. And one of the pieces of advice that I give to companies is start your ownership transition now. It doesn't matter how young you are. Even if the founder is not going to retire for 30 or 40 years, start it now, because building that culture of ownership early in the life of the business, I think allows you to take the time you need. And even if you're a very small company, you can carve out a little bit of time. Ownership is truly meaningful to people. We did not know this. When we transitioned to a worker co-op, I thought that we were formalizing something that already existed, and nothing could have been further from the truth. Ownership is very meaningful to people. It changes people's perspective. It changes their commitment. So why not get started now?
Also think, and I come from an operational background, but admin jobs are no longer the jobs they used to be. And I think that if you hire strategically in your admin department, you can outsource things like your bookkeeping, then you have somebody who's helping you run the business and is really in there in the core, and that is their responsibility. Generally, they're non-billable. They can spend more time on those kinds of things. So if you have real problem solvers and people are wanting to make their future with you, then that's really what you're looking for, and you can take advantage of that.
Couldn't agree more. I think robust systems and operations are what enable us to do the work that we do, and to the high performance, low carbon, and to drive the change that we want to see in our businesses and our industry. It's absolutely critical.
And you're a $4 million company, and you're doing that as well as anybody I know. Yeah.
Thank you.
We're so on the subject of size, we're essentially a 4-person company, and we're doing, last year about $6.5 million.
Wow.
We're in the process of doing this, and one of the things that's come out of this is it's really forcing us to look at those structures and those practices, and take it from just being 2 people's heads that have been carrying all these balls for the life of the company, and trying to break it out and create a structure and create an org chart and create a path for us to make this transition happen. And what we're seeing come out of it is that we're actually building before we even transition the ownership of the company, a much stronger company that's working much better, and it's serving us all better as we're here. And we're doing that through the help of consultants, and maybe Paul can chime in here, because we're actually using Helm, who he works with, to help us through that process. And if we didn't have outside help, I don't know that we'd be able to even think about tackling this. I know Deirdre, I heard you guys talk to some other businesses. Rachel, did you guys use outside consultants, or?
We worked with ICA Group, and I'm pretty sure we got the referral to ICA from you, John.
We worked with
So
them too.
they were our cooperative conversion consultant. And of course for the ownership piece, and of course we had our lawyer and our accountant, but I don't think we worked with Helm now, which is kind of funny because Paul works for Helm. Paul works for us, and he works for Helm, and Helm works for us, and the circle goes round.
This is all circling back to Paul's bank account somehow.
Yeah,
It's all very incestuous.
Smart.
Although thankfully Paul's not our consultant.
At Helm.
At Helm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, Ben, if with only 4 people, you've got to get consultants to help you.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
just can't possibly do all of that, right? So that's like a really
That's
smart. That's
exactly
a really smart choice.
Yeah.
And I think John always says that you can't really move into worker ownership until it's like selling your company, and it is selling your company, but you can't do that until you've figured everything out. And you're selling your employees are not going to want to buy into a company that doesn't work very well, right? You have to do all that work.
the employees want to know that we're buying something that's worth buying. And then also at the
Yeah.
same time, there's a sense of responsibility from the owners that they want to actually, hand over a good company that has
Yeah.
a chance of carry on instead of just here's a bag of worms. Good luck.
Yeah, right. Come join us.
You know,
Good luck with
there's
that.
there's a gigantic business literature of how to maximize the selling price of your business. How do you do that? And even if that's not your goal, which for most of us it's not, it's the same stuff. It's the same stuff. You just got to make a great business, and that's key from early on.
So you're telling me, John, I should get them to agree to a price while it's still kind of shaky?
Ben, you joke about that, but we set the valuation for Bigmeister. I mean, I married a woman who's an extraordinarily good planner and money manager, and I'm really lucky in that regard. And so I had some options. Didn't rely on the purchase price of the business to have a comfortable retirement. But it was an interesting phenomenon to see, using the traditional valuation measures, some 3 to 5 times EBITDA, and you can look that up, how once I handed off management of the company in, what was it, Rachel, 2016, 2017, I stopped going to
started in, I don't remember when you stopped
Yeah.
going.
So basically,
management
once
team
I
meetings.
stopped going to management team meetings, the valuation of the company just kept going up and up and up. And
Which was unfortunate for us, because then we had to pay more. No, that's
no. So there was
Just kidding.
it was just this sort of really interesting situation where, there was no question I was going to ask for more money because they were doing such a good job of managing it. But it was to me, it's just a fascinating process, this sort of social construct of what a corporation is, what a business is, and how we value things. And it occurred to me more than once that the value of Bigmeister is embodied in its employees, and how extraordinarily well they're doing their jobs. And I'm going to reward them for adding that value by charging them for it. And it was just tough to get my head around, and it continues to be, but it's a useful social construct for the most part. It's at our level, the way we do it, it's a useful social construct, but it is a fascinating phenomenon to me.
Well, are there lessons that could apply to things other than selling a business, like ownership or like control of BS and Beer, or nonprofits, or other groups? Are there like sort of some broad lessons in transition of ownership, things you should do, things you shouldn't do?
So there's a book.
Or not
that I
ownership.
really-
Yeah,
there's
leadership, I mean.
Oh, well, in terms of ownership, there's a book that I really like and then I really hate. It's written by a guy named Bo Burlingham, who is sort of a friend of mine. It's called Finish Big: How Great Entrepreneurs Go Out on Top. And when it came out, I read this whole book, and it's how you prepare your business to sell, and the different kinds of sales. There can be family sales, or market sales to a larger company. And there was nothing in the book about employee ownership. Like, the words were not mentioned. It kind of pissed me off but anyway, but I have to say that it's a very good book about what you need to do to build a good business that's saleable, and that's, as Ben said, something that people would want to buy. And even your own employees.
Mike,
Oh, Mike, I'm not sure. Oh, go ahead, Paul.
I just want one of the interesting things that I learned a lot about was the distinctions between ownership, leadership, and day-to-day management, and how important defining those distinctions and enforcing those distinctions is. So, I mean, I just want to put that out there. I mean, you're talking about BS and beers is a different, that would be a really interesting conversation with regard to BS and beers, for instance. What's the difference between ownership, leadership, and day-to-day management? But I'll just leave it there and let Rachel chime in.
Well, I was going to try to answer your question in terms of leadership. I think it was sort of, well, I don't even actually remember the question. It's probably because I shouldn't be drinking rosé while we're doing this, even though I know I'm supposed to be, or at least I'm supposed to be drinking something. But I wanted to go back to, so something Deirdre said about sort of early on when you were talking, Deirdre, about what leadership, the sort of the type of leadership that Deirdre and I think both are trying to espouse, and that I think are in a way embodied in our companies and in our culture. And it's this tension between sort of stepping up and also this healthy tension and really powerful tension between stepping up and also empowering others to step up. So it's, and I think that's really applicable to any organization that you may find yourself in a leadership role in, is how do you step into that role of leadership, but you're using that as a forum or a platform to empower others rather than to exercise power, or to exercise power over people. And that's, I think, what's both really exciting and energizing, and just also something that I'm constantly finding that I'm, working on to try to navigate that. So
I'm gonna take that a little bit further and try and answer a question that Josh had in the chat. And this question is, how do you pull out the potential in people when you know they have the ability, but they don't want to? I've always said I didn't want to be a lead carpenter, and now I'm in charge of production.
yeah, I know, and it's amazing to think back that he said he didn't want to be a lead carpenter. That's Josh
Right.
Menard, Big Maestro
Yeah.
production manager.
And I think for me, the big difference was that I felt like it would just be too much responsibility for me. In not in the sense that I was afraid of it. I was afraid of what it would do to me. And I take responsibility super seriously, and it would just close me down. It would be an incredible burden. And now I am sharing that with all these other people, and it doesn't seem like a burden. It seems like a challenging, fun exercise. We get together every week. We get to have conversations with people we really care about, about people we really care about, topics we really care about. It's problem solving all the time. We're constantly coaching each other. In our management meeting, in our leadership team meeting today, Rob said to Ryan, I really, really liked yesterday how you handled 2 incidences about using pronouns for staff people and people on the job. And it was just like such a nice way to say, I'm with you, I'm learning from you. This is what I overheard. And we're doing things like that all the time. And I couldn't have done that by myself.
I totally resonate with that, Deirdre, of worrying that it would be a burden.
Yeah.
And realizing just through the course of plugging along each day and seeing what happened the next day, and and not making, worrying that it would be a burden, but not deciding that it would be a burden, but just waiting to see what would happen, and learning that it wouldn't be a burden. But it's because of that shared responsibility.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
And I have an interesting question, because Deirdre, you said that you have sort of this 5-year path to ownership, right? So is part of that kind of building up people to get to that level, right? Some here's a little bit more responsibility, here's a little bit more training, here's a little bit more of how we handle this situation, here's a little bit more about the systems that we have in place, so that you don't have that burnout, or so that you don't feel like all of this is on your shoulder. So is that part of your 5-year transition? Is there some kind of training almost that happens?
So we have these little Abby, who's on the call today, is our communications coordinator, and she spearheaded. We have these little passports that we call Path to Ownership, and they have different sections, and you get a stamp for completing these different experiences. They can be like sitting down with Siobhan, our director of finance and admin, and really learning about how we present our financial statements. You see them at a company meeting once a year. You want to know more than that. Some people really want to know even more. They are going on a tour of our past projects with John. You and your partner coming out to dinner with John and I, and John's partner Kim and my husband, so that we just get to know you and know your family. I mean, the company has really turned over, and with the pandemic, we're just behind in that community building. So we figure over those, it's joining a committee. Like we have a social committee we call FunCom, and we have an employee donation committee. Joining one of those committees, working with other people that you don't ordinarily work with, knowing them better, taking on a different kind of responsibility. So we're trying to spread them out. We are just about to start it. The pandemic slowed us down. We have the books made. We've handed them out. Next week, in 2 weeks, we're going to really have a meeting about kicking it off. And it isn't so much about sharing the burden as understanding the company and understanding what ownership could mean to you. In the past, ownership has meant so many different things to different people. And we're trying to build that collective feeling. And also, as John said, build that third generation.
Two other things about that. So it takes 5 years to become a South Mountain owner. So that path to ownership,
Yeah.
you cannot be an owner until you've been in the company for 5 years. And also that another key part of it is that it will be in cohorts. So 4 or 5 people who have been recently hired will start the path to ownership together. So that's an opportunity for cross-pollination. They'll be from different departments and they will work together over those 5. It's really 7 years, because 2 years after you become an ownership to settle into ownership. So it's kind of it's a pretty intensive idea, I think. Yeah. By the way, I just wanted to say about Ryan, about the spirit of the meeting that Deirdre was talking about. Ryan, who was so sensitive about the pronouns. We were in this part of the visioning where people were answering the question of what do we want South Mountain to be known for? And people were coming out with these wonderful, lofty things, you know, all of these things. And Ryan, who's very soft-spoken, but quite the leader, suddenly pipes up and he said, crushing the competition. And the next person that spoke and said their words said, humility. It was wonderful. You had to be there.
Yeah, well, that kind of, I mean, that's one of my questions was what qualities do you look for in a leader? What kind of skills are important? Actually, that was one of Kylie's questions. What qualities do you look for? What skills are important? So you're looking for humility and confidence, and do you hire people, or like would you hire a low-level carpenter with leadership in mind, or like how do you identify those people who may eventually be leaders?
Mike, I think the most important perhaps answer to that, and this is something that we have learned the hard way and learned over time, is that when we're hiring somebody, anybody, we are hiring a future owner, and then we have to think about them as future owners. We can teach people skills, but we cannot change who they are. So that is always in our mind when we're hiring. Is this really going to be a future owner? So it gives a great kind of frame for hiring.
And I think I would.
Yeah, I would say that. Go ahead, Rachel.
No, finish what you were going to follow on, and I was going to try to make a slightly different point.
Okay, I don't think we hire everyone to be leaders. I don't think everybody is a leader, and we need all kinds of people. That's one thing. As John said, we are hiring everyone to be an owner, a future owner. We anticipate that every single person that comes will stay with us for their career, and they will become an owner. Very few people don't become owners. I like to say that we have 2 meals a day together in the building, and they are coffee break and lunch. And whenever I'm interviewing somebody, I seriously think if I'm going to have 2 meals a day with them 5 days, we used to be 5 days a week for 20 years. right? And
That's a
that's a
good test.
criteria. That's a criteria. It's like, is this working? Is it comfortable? Are we gonna want to share space and talk about our dogs and our vacations and when you planted your peas and, somebody's children. So that's the criteria. That's a greater criteria for me. Not everyone's going to be a leader. Also, I think that as the work world shifts, I'm looking more to hiring problem solvers, people who are comfortable kind of with what's thrown at them and figuring out a way, people who want to learn. That's really, we can outsource or find other services to do a lot of different kinds of work that we used to hire for.
Sometimes we'll be deliberating about hiring, and Deirdre will say, I really don't want to eat lunch with that person.
Deirdre, that actually is a very similar point that I was going to make, is the difference between hiring for ownership and for leadership. And of course, we just transitioned to ownership. So we are not yet where you are in terms of thinking about, I would say that we're still getting there to that, do we want to have lunch together for the next 20 years? But I think it's a really good question, Mike, about, how do you hire for leadership and what do you look for? And I think that I do think to some extent, this goes back to Josh's question, is you don't necessarily see the leadership potential or see that somebody knows that they have leadership potential sort of right out of the gate. And there is this this sense of needing to sort of cultivate that and to give people sort of space to step into the potential that they have. Right. I think, when I think about the people who we hire and their leadership potential, it's really about, Deirdre said problem solvers, but it's also sort of entrepreneurialism of just wanting to go out there. It's sort of another way of saying problem solving, but just wanting to go out there and figure things out and taking the initiative. But, I'm curious too what Paul would say about that.
I have been thinking a lot about leadership. Recently, I've been asked about it, and I'm not sure I have a good answer yet, but I'm pretty sure that it's not at all about the big things that you think of when you think of leadership, but it's about the little things. And I think probably the most important is forgiveness. And I realize this may be the first time that word has been used in BS and Beers, but it's a forward-looking forgiveness. It's the ability to say, yeah, you screwed up, but you learned from it. We learned from it. We're a better organization for it, and we're grateful to have you on board. And to be able to apply that consistently and fairly, because selective forgiveness is going to destroy your organization faster than anything, but that forward-looking forgiveness is really what enables what I refer to as the team-supported individual accountability. Someone's more willing to be accountable if they know they can screw up, and that the team is going to take it in stride and learn from it and fix what caused it and move on.
Our firm is not moving toward an employee-owned co-op at this point, although I'm very intrigued by this, and certainly I'm going to look into it more. But we have been talking a lot about hiring of late, and we have a couple people that we're trying out now, and my partner Joe and I have been talking about, what is the criteria for what would make a good person to share in this journey with us for a long time, hopefully. And I love the coffee break and lunch criteria. That's fantastic. But what I've been stressing more than anything else is we can teach skills, but you can't teach someone to care. So it really is about the character of that person, and if they care about others whom they don't know. Like I would almost rather watch someone order their lunch at a restaurant than watch them miter trim, because the way that they treat the server is actually more informative about the kind of, basically their process of how they're going to treat. We do a fair amount of remodeling as well as new home, but on the remodel side, treating someone's space as if it is your own is highly problematic. You have to treat it like you're a guest in their house, and you have to be extremely I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys all know this. You understand the way that you have to treat
Right.
someone's space if you're going to be in it for a long, unpleasant, dusty, miserable time. It's already bad. You have to care on another level about people, and then you can care about your work, and then you can learn the skills to make that work better. And I feel like that probably translates all the way up the chain into a leadership role if that person desires that. But you can definitely lead from within the pack by the way that you choose to carry yourself and the way that you're executing your work, as well as the way that you treat those around you. I think that's very, this is a very useful conversation on that front.
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about that, and we had these good performance reviews, and they were about skill development, and a lot of the skills broke down into public speaking, soft skills, and facilitation. And so that's what we're concentrating on. And the soft skills, we're going to do some coaching for some of our employees that are moving into leadership positions. And I was thinking about the other day, and some people innately have soft skills and some people don't. And the people that don't, they possibly learned it through other people in their lives, often when they were children, or maybe they just didn't have that experience. Right? It doesn't mean that they can't learn it. It means that nobody's taken the time to explain to them how to interact with other people in a way that, like Paul's talking about, in a way that models forgiveness and kindness, that modulate your voice and choose your words carefully, and the impact. A lot of people just never learned that, not through any fault of their own. So, or just trying to think about how we can help people do that, and that will make them more effective leaders. And it's not changing their personalities. It's really just giving them more skills than they already have. We know that they have the potential to be good leaders, and that they want to do it.
It was interesting, something that we saw in people's self-evaluations that we've never seen before, is that there was a theme across the company that when the answer to the question, what skills would you like to develop further? I can't tell you how many people said communication skills. And what? They're saying that, and that was really exciting.
We had an audience question from Laura that I'll combine with one from Kylie, that basically, if you're in a place where you really don't have a lot of people to hire, or you don't have the ideal people available, and so you have to sort of start with less than ideal candidates because you need to get things done, what resources or techniques specifically would you use, or are there outside resources? How do you train somebody to, I guess, well, either just be a good employee or especially to be a good leader? Are there specific steps you can take, or companies you can hire, books to read, things like that?
So the first part of that, I would just say, cast a wider net. And this is something that we have learned only recently, I would say. Cast a wider net and keep at it, and don't rush to hire. Yes, it seems like we need this person, we need somebody now. I don't think it's true. We'll get by for the next 3 months or 6 months. Hiring is just the most important thing. Don't give it short shrift. But the second part of your question, Mike, I mean, I think, Deirdre kind of answered that just now, that always to be looking for and working on more ways and better ways to help people be great employees.
I think a couple of things for us, as John said, we're very slow to hire. It's been an extraordinarily stressful year, particularly in some of our departments, because they were understaffed. People moved on, started their own businesses in the pandemic. And this week we have 2 full-time hires and 1 intern starting in our energy technology department. And they've had a rough year, and they've had to really deal with that while it took us a long time to hire. And we couldn't find anyone in the fall, and then January, February, we got great applicants and we hired them. And the other part of that is that in one of our NESI bottom lines meetings, Megan Avila at Pioneer Millworks said to us, and this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, you need to make your company seem like a place people really want to come and work. And that seems incredibly obvious, but she does marketing at Pioneer. That's her role. She's like, all your Instagram and your speaking and your materials and your website, you want them to show what a great place you are and how great it would be to get a job there. And we have spent 4 years working on that. And I think that's really coming. And Abby, who's on this call, she's done the bulk of the work on that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a long-term commitment. You know, it's an ongoing and long-term commitment. It's not a short-term, what role do you need to fill today?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was important, what Ben said is that, we build good buildings, but we don't always build good businesses. And when people ask me for advice, even if they never want to be an owner or in leadership, I always tell them, read a couple of business books, because it will really help you understand how your business operates. It makes you a better employee. And I think it also gives you kind of an interest level again. So like if there are people on here who aren't employee owned businesses, maybe want to translate to that in the future, have your employees read up on some of the business practices or do some training with how your business operates, because I think that we don't often think about why we do things in business when we're just trying to get the work done every day.
I think that's a really good point, Emily. And I think, whether you're on a path to employee ownership or not, open books, management and sharing financials with your company really helps people understand the nuts and bolts and behind the scenes of just how things get done. It's really useful, and it takes time. As Deirdre said, you see in your path to ownership, people see the financials maybe once a year. You said at your day of business at, Big Meister, it's 3 times a year that employees see all the financials, but 3 times a year is, that's just like scratching the surface. It takes a really long time to understand, even at fairly simple businesses like ours, the financial nuts and bolts.
I think we've had a really hard time getting traction with open book management, and long discussions with our friends at Zingerman's who have, they're so good at it, and everybody knows what's happening financially all the time, but they're selling things, lots of little things. It's easy to, and I think that one of the things that has given the open book management more traction lately is that our production director, Newell, has started to just break things down into little pieces. He talks all the time with the crews and says, all right, the next 2 weeks, this is the chunk of work we're going to do. This is the amount of time we allotted to it. Let's see how we can do. And so people are starting to get digestible bits of financial information that they can actually impact, and they're excited about it. And now that's moving to the architects who are starting to manage more of their own budgets. So I think that's the big thing, is that we always kind of thought, well, how do you empower people to have an impact on what happens financially when what you do is projects that cost $500,000 or $2 million? And it's by breaking them down into digestible bits that people can actually work with.
Don, I want to take that manageable bits back to Laura's and I think Kylie's question about hiring. And I think there's merit to figuring out how to provide a really good rewarding experience for an intern or an apprentice or whatever whom you hire for 3 months. Just make it a 3-month time frame and figure out how to make that as mutually beneficial as possible. Don't start off with saying, well, I'm gonna hire these new people and hope that they work out. Put a limited timeline on it and then just see what happens. I think as a profession, builders and architects need to have a greater responsibility than we realize to being what I think of as the employer of first resort, helping people get that first meaningful line on their resume. And I would love to help people figure out ways to do that. But I think that if you can figure out how to create that really useful 3-month experience, that you will find with every now and then you'll land someone who for some reason ends up staying well past that 3 months. But it'll be a nice serendipitous surprise, and it'll make it. I think we'll have made the effort worthwhile.
Yeah, we have great success with that, and it also hones our skills in terms of in this short period of time, how are we going to create a good experience? So we need to get better at that and better at managing people of all ages, all backgrounds. And we're big believers in the fact that it doesn't matter whether you stay. I mean, we'd love you to stay if it works out, but even if you don't stay, we want you to know what having a good job is like so that you never take a bad job again. And that's our pay it forward part. The other part, to go to what Laura was saying, is that it's a lot about attracting talent, a lot about values and making sure that you know how to express your values, because especially these days, people really want values aligned places to work. And so if you're clear on what those are, you can promote those. And if you have some patience, you're going to find the people that you want, I think. We had a candidate come yesterday who was so values aligned, and he'd done so much homework, and every previous job he'd ever held just showed that this was his life mission. And he sent us an email today and said, I think I found my place. This is where I want to be. I hope this works out. So I think the values really make a difference.
Yeah, but it's really true, but there's, principles aren't principles until they cost something. And I think what he saw is, so he had worked at some really good places, and he really loved working at these places. They were good companies. But what he wants to do in his work is that he wants to feel like he is truly contributing to a community and making the world a better place. And he didn't see that part at those companies. And that's what he saw. We're hiring him if we hire him as a junior architect. And he met with all the architects and he asked them, what's your favorite project that you've ever done here? And they all, the projects that they talked about were these mission-driven projects that they love. And he just went, that's what I want to do, So it's true. We have to, the things that we all want to do, the things that we all want to do mission-driven work. And it is so, how do we do mission-driven work and stay in business at the same time and stay prosperous at the time? How do we not hate ourselves for what we do? How do we do stuff that we really believe in? I think many of us are struggling with that all the time, but that struggle communicated to people, it makes them want to come and struggle with you.
So as the host of tonight's show, I'm the bearer of bad news with the last 5 minutes and there being 4 of you. I want to add or end on a question that I don't know if you sort of pre-planned this, but I feel like is a great way to end the show, which is legacy. What does it mean to you, both Paul and John, leaving, now you're kind of in your transition, what does it mean to you? What, as departing founders, do you want to be yours as you leave this company? And for the two who are taking over, what's your goal to leave your legacy over the next however many years? So I think we start with Paul and John, and then we, as a lady, we let the ladies finish out on the end here as what they hope to build as their legacy, following up on that.
Great question. Go, Paul.
All right, I was hoping you'd go first. I don't want to. We can all find our legacies. I don't want to put pressure on people about legacies, because I don't want people to go out there and thinking that their business has to survive their departure. They've got to turn it into a worker-owned co-op. They have to find some buyers. I don't think that sort of pressure is helpful to a small business owner. I think I'd go back to what I talked about at the beginning. How many people ended up with more options in their lives as a result of having worked with you, having met you? And I would just leave it there.
I don't know what I would say about personal legacy, but my life has been so wrapped up with South Mountain for so long. And I would say that my hope and my conviction as well, my hope is that this company, that I have watched this arc of improvement over 50 years. And I would hope, and I've watched this company actually have an impact on its community. I would hope that it just continues to have more of an impact and becomes a better company over time.
Yeah, and I would just follow. I mean, I haven't even become the CEO, so I'm not sure I've gotten to the point of thinking about what my
You
legacy
kind of
will be.
have, actually, but go on.
But no, I think I think it's what John says. I think it's about what John and Paul said. It's about the company continuing to another generation, going through a leadership transition after I leave, and sticking with our mission and our values, and providing a good living for people. In a that's really important. The business part, as we come back to, you still need to get the business part right.
Oh, this is going to be really boring because I could just say ditto, but I do see myself as a bridge. And I think it's really important to emphasize what John said early on about Deirdre and I coming into these roles much later in life than Paul and John did in terms of founding the company. That the second and subsequent generations of leadership are never going to be in leadership for as long as the founder. And so it's really, I do think in a way, if I think about what my legacy would be, it would just be setting the stage, trying to put in place, lay the foundation for what comes next, which is just another way of what everybody else just said, because Deirdre and I are not going to be in this role in our roles for all that long. Maybe 10 years, I don't know. And so it's not, if you think Paul gave us notice that he wanted to retire in 10 years, I don't think it's going to take as long, hopefully the next time around, right? I mean, once you've done it the first time, it hopefully gets easier, or at least you have a roadmap to follow. But yeah, I'm the bridge to what comes next.
Yeah, but 10 years is a heartbeat. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe you're starting that now, right? So you've gone through this transition, and that maybe you're only 10 to 15 years out again. So you're like, okay, we're starting this now, and you're growing those people. And I think that's basically what all of you has said the whole show, is really developing the next generation, because it's never going to be the founder again. It's going to be this beautiful team that you've built over the years. So yeah, I had a great time. I love to talk about business. So I didn't have a whole lot to say because I was just taking it all in.
Well, Emily and Mike and Ben, you just do such a great job.
Travis.
Thank you. Travis, thank you so much for what you do.
Thanks for being with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah,
a
yeah,
pleasure to
thank
have
you
you
all
back.
very much.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your years of expertise and what you've been doing with your company. So have a wonderful night, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You.